In 1974, Tyrone Clark was sentenced to life in prison for a rape he's always maintained he did not commit. A conviction that came in large part because the rape survivor identified him as her attacker. But a few months back, that survivor told GBH News she was worried she may have identified the wrong man. It was the first time she went public with the concern that she'd also previously reported to a judge and the state's parole board. After that, Clark's lawyers asked the judge to grant him a new trial, and now Suffolk County DA Rachael Rollins is backing him up. She filed a motion Friday, agreeing with the request and pledging to drop the charges altogether if a judge signs off on the new trial, which would likely set Clark free after spending 48 years behind bars. His conviction is one of several Rollins has moved overturned since taking office after her staff began a comprehensive review of old cases, and that review is one of several efforts the DA's office is looking back on in a new analysis that takes stock of the first 2+ years of her term as Suffolk County's top prosecutor. It's billed as a midterm report, but it also may end up serving as a final report of Rollins' tenure as DA. In July, as I'm sure you know, President Biden tapped her to serve as his U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts. She's now awaiting a hearing in the Senate. Rachael Rollins joins me, but I should note, as the confirmation process is still ongoing, we have agreed to keep this conversation focused on the job she currently holds. District Attorney, it's good to see you.
Always a pleasure.
So the survivor in this, Tyrone Clark, did not say it was not Tyrone Clark, but that she was not sure that it was. So is your position based on what you believe to be his innocence, or that he's just not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt?
I believe what we have is an extraordinary circumstance where an eyewitness, a victim, has essentially recanted their statement. And it speaks, I think, to the character of this individual to have endured such a horrific situation, and now on her own, right? Writing a letter to parole, making it clear that she was no longer sure that this was in fact the individual. And after that happened, as well as recognizing that my office, the office I now lead, had not maintained appropriately a semen sample or the underwear that could potentially have exonerated or inculpated this individual, we couldn't reap the benefit of our error. So we opted to assent to the motion.
But do you think he's innocent of this charge?
I think he did not. I don't comment on innocence or guilt. That's up to him to say. What I can say is I will no longer stand behind this conviction. And I believe we mishandled evidence even back almost 50 years ago. The standards were there and we didn't meet them.
The survivor seems to think that racism may be involved. Clark is black. She is white. She acknowledges she had very little contact with black people. At the time of this, it was an all-white jury. Do you think this case is tainted by racism?
I think what we know now, Jim, is that back in the 70s, eyewitness testimony was the gold standard. Yeah. We know now in 2021, we still use eyewitness testimony, but it is inherently questioned. And when you add to that cross-racial identifications, in particular in circumstances where there are individuals that might not have come in contact often in their lives with a different race, that they are even more problematic. So I am never happy when I hear a jury of all one race, and we both know it's only ever all white people. If we all closed our eyes right now and I asked you to think of the last time a white person was found guilty by an all black jury, you wouldn't even let the words finish. You'd be laughing because it would never happen. But I can't tell you how many people, unfortunately, have been tried by a jury that is not a jury of their peers. And so there was fundamentally, I think, unfairness in this trial. But I think the extraordinary piece that brought it to our attention was this victim, this survivor, quite frankly, her letter to parole.
So even if you and Mr. Clark are successful, the kidnapping and robbery convictions stand, but I'm assuming because he's been in jail for most of half a century, he would likely be released. But, you know, as a criminal justice reformer like you are, I don't think I've ever heard you talk about what a state, what a government owes somebody who's taken 50 years of their life. Sure, what's the max? He can get $500,000 if he jumps through hurdles, which are difficult hurdles to jump through. You can never make someone whole. What does a government owe somebody whose life they have taken?
I mean, this is the very crux of why we started the Integrity Review Bureau in my office, right? We have undone over 300 years of wrongful convictions. And first and foremost, what I think the government owes them is an apology for the fact that their screams and yells of "it wasn't me" or "this wasn't fair." You know, we're ministers of justice, Jim. I get it, I'm the prosecutor, but if it's the Commonwealth versus Jim Braude, the Commonwealth represents the victim, the community, the witnesses, and Jim Braude. Jim Braude gets his own lawyer, but we have to make sure that the convictions we secure are done ethically, are done pursuant to our Constitution, and will withstand scrutiny. And what I can say is, at the very least, they deserve an apology. And we have at times taken the extraordinary measure of writing a letter in support of them when they plead to the Attorney General for the $1 million that you're entitled to. Yeah. $1 million, right? Or a 1983 claim, which is what ultimately happens if they believe their civil rights were violated, and they can file that in federal court. But what we do is we stand up and we say we were wrong when we were wrong, at the very least, and then we assist in the process moving forward.
You know, that Integrity Review Bureau you mentioned, my understanding is from your report, 10 people have had their convictions overturned, a total of 321 years served, and included in that group is someone virtually everyone watching the show knows. He's been on the show, Sean Ellis. Tell us briefly, if you can, District Attorney, what else do you think should matter to the public and to criminal justice reformers that you've overseen in your 2.5 years in the job?
Well, first and foremost, that, right? You know, when we have a James Watson and Fred Clay case where witnesses were hypnotized, and that's how they testified. Nobody should be willing to stand behind those convictions. I'm also proud of our discharge integrity team, right? Which we work really hard, Jim, to have 4 outside experts, a criminal defense attorney, a judge, a retired judge, a community member, and an active member of law enforcement that assist me in the investigation of every officer involved shooting. I'm really proud of my executive leadership team, which is actually, I believe, a mirror image of Suffolk County, something that we should all as leaders, certainly in government and in the private sector as well, strive for. And then I'm incredibly proud of my exceptional staff, a staff that I did inherit, but many that I brought on board that work every day to help the community, right? Ultimately, yes, we are prosecutors, but we work really hard to make sure we're thinking holistically with wraparound services for many of the individuals that come in contact with the community. 80% of those people, Jim, nonviolent, non-serious crimes in the municipal and district courts. And then absolutely, I am going to come as hard as I can to make sure that we get accountability on the violent, serious crimes. Part of why I wrote the Rollins memo and those 15 crimes that I wanted to divert, dismiss, or decline is so I could focus myopically on those violent, serious crimes like the homicide we had yesterday in Jamaica Plain, or some of the other very violent situations we've seen in Suffolk County.
What have you gotten wrong that you wish you could undo or learn from?
Goodness. You know, I think my urgency sometimes is very well intended, for sure. And I remain urgent because I think we are decades behind where we need to be. But, you know, now that I feel as if I'm, you know, a toddler, right? Remember, I'm 50 years old in like human years. I'm 20 years old as a lawyer, and I'm 3 years old as your DA. I absolutely think that I take a second to breathe now a little bit before I respond. But I am fiercely proud of the work, not just me, but the exceptional individuals, not ADAs, victim witness advocates, investigators, admins, our community engagement team, comms, government affairs. All of our teams are working really hard for Suffolk County and our law enforcement partners. Whether we agree all the time or not, it's the state police Boston Police, Winthrop, Chelsea, Revere, and Transit.
How far have you gotten with Governor Baker to have him choose Dan Mulhern, who you have believed is created in your image to replace you should you become U.S. Attorney?
What's really fascinating to me is, I am looking, look, I worked very hard to become the district attorney of Suffolk County. I had an exceptional campaign team, campaign manager. The community coalesced behind me as a candidate, and we won with a significant mandate, over 40% in the primary, 80% in the general. So what I want is somebody who's qualified to do this job. What is not going to be positive is if there's an individual who has, no experience as a prosecutor, right? No experience as a criminal defense attorney, very little experience, if any, in the communities that most often come in contact with our criminal legal system, to be put in charge of this office. Right now, Jim, we have an acting mayor, we have an acting commissioner in Boston, and whether it is Mayor Janey or some other mayor, there is going to be a new commissioner of police. That is not stability. We need a stable force in the DA's office, somebody who has been there from day one. And I firmly believe that any leader should have their number two be able to step in if they lead immediately. And I personally believe that Dan is not only culturally competent, but incredibly qualified to do this job. And he's been with me day one, implementing our policies. He's known by not only law enforcement, but every community I walk into, people know him. So, again, I think, though I've heard some good names, I am very confident that my number two, Danny Mulhern, is going to be a really good DA.
10 seconds. Is Governor Baker giving you any indication he's going to follow your recommendation? 10 seconds.
Governor Baker and I are talking about very important things now, Mass Ave and Melnia Cass with the Attorney General. I am confident that I will be having further conversations. And although it's up to him, I'm hoping I can be persuasive.
Rachael Rollins, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for your time.
Always a pleasure.